Well, welcome to summer on the front porch. And it's cooler in here than it is outside, so that's a very good thing. This will be a lovely evening because we have conversation going on, and you are welcome to join in the conversation. You all may have a memory or a thought or something that really resonates with you when you begin to hear the conversation around the table between Hopi and Michael and Jean. A couple of things while we hopefully are getting a couple more people who are just we're waiting on. We have our Under the Tent event this weekend. There are tickets available at the front desk. At the door they'll be $80. They actually should be $80 this evening, but if you're able to come and would like to attend, Candy will take care of taking your contribution and making sure you have a ticket for $65. There's raffle tickets downstairs for a TV that also benefits the society, and the beautiful rocking Adirondack that was reminiscent of the front porch, not maybe in Warwick so much, will be part of the silent auction. So that was just to give you a taste of what's going on this weekend. We are delighted that you're all here, and we are looking forward to an informal opportunity to hear about days gone by here in Warwick.
And speaking of days gone by, of course we have our absolutely beautiful book here that most of you know about. Those of you that don't should at least at some point, either tonight or tomorrow or sometime in the future, take a look at this, this volume. Hopefully there's been discussion again about the potential of having it reprinted. It's an absolutely wonderful edition with many, many colored pictures, many, many photographs. And it is pretty much of a clear picture of what life was like in the last 150 years in Warwick, New York. So it behoves any of you who are interested in our wonderful community to look at this marvelous book. Now what we're going to talk about tonight, all right, Jean May was one of the authors of this book, and Silvio, who helped work on this book. Who else worked on this book? Many people? No. Just Jean and Jean yourself and Silvia. So now we'll go on to front porches. Front porches. It's a phenomena of America in the late 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century. This concept of the second living room, the outside living room. And how did it come about? Certainly there were loggias and porches all over the world at different times, but not yet. There is certainly the idea of the porch as we know it came in shortly after the Civil War with the construction of the wooden houses. And this kind of design, which allows people at a time to break from a pattern that had been already established for many hundreds of years. Now, why? We don't know that it took on so well. Some of the reasons could be, number one, the Civil War that changed everything. In this First World War, there's a remark that was, take the boy out of the farm and show him Paris, and he never wants to come back to the farm. And this was the truth of all those fellows that were in the war. They had new experiences. And consequently, the Civil War is one of the reasons that we readjusted our living pattern. Certainly the railroad that came in at the time of the Civil War and then afterwards, that allowed people that had to live in communities like New York to be able to come out if they were fortunate enough and spend part of the summer in the countryside. The actual clothes that people wore got to be a little simpler, certainly for women. It was the end of the great hoop skirts. And the dresses, though they were still in many layers, and the blouses were still in many layers, there was an ease in wearing the clothes that they didn't have before, and an ability to get around. And so that it was the clothes, the railroad, the doctors that would start by saying, open the windows, get some fresh air into the rooms, get outside, get into the sunshine. This was a new concept in medicine. So it had to do with all of these things. There was a sense of ease in living. The ease in living came about because of the mechanical things that were devised. The ease came by because you no longer had to clean an oil lamp that took so long. You now could turn a gas a pet cock, or you could eventually switch on a switch for an electric light. So all that ease, all that gave you a little bit of a leisure time and a little bit of a time for living of enjoyment that you really didn't have pre-Civil War. And this allowed you to enjoy the fruits of life. And of course, above and beyond all of these local things, other things that were pouring in other than the railroad into the small village. And that was newsprint. There were magazines, there were catalogs, all of this showing you another way to do things. New kinds of flowers to put into the garden, a new concept about a garden, a new concept of how to take care of your garden. It wasn't as hard a job. There were mechanical devices. You didn't have to have sheep in the front of the yard. You may have had to have a horse that pulled a cutter, but you didn't have to have an animal do that, or get out there and do it with a scythe. So that there were all these devices of all kinds that allowed you to have this little moments of pleasure. And we found, and I'm sure everybody in this room can remember those wonderful times, and it came right after supper, and it went on to just at twilight. And finally somebody goes over to the wall and turns on the switch, and it's usually one bulb. And it is that shocking brightness of the 160-watt bulb that destroys that wonderful kind of what they call in France, l'heure bleue, that wonderful blue twilight. And that created for all of us a memory. And not only a visual memory, but there was a scent memory, because we can all remember that smell of plants, grass, the freshness that was coming across the hills or out of the woods. There was a whole sense of well-being. And in our little creation back here, we have our front porch. And we took we said the front porch from the 1930s to the 1940s. Now, in thinking about the porch from the 1930s, that meant from 1929, 1930 to 1950, because that took in all the 40s, which was such an important part of our lives. Everybody in this room was affected somehow or other in what happened in the 1940s. And so the pre-Second World War, and then the war, and then after the war, and then of course the great big explosion of all the things that happened to people, and again another new way of life. And what we're concerned with now is the memories of the 30s and 40s. And so I have two people here with me that can bring us back to those wonderful days when they were children. And there's one picture that I had right here. This will pass around. And there's Jean, and there's Hope as children in Warwick at the time that we start our story, 1930s. So my first question on people is, what are your first memories of those first summers? Opie, what do you remember? As your earliest memories like that?
We grew up together, right next to each other. And every day we played together. And my mother had a vegetable garden. And so at one point, we went into the vegetable selling business, and we would take her vegetables from her garden and peddle them up and down the street. And that's what we're probably doing there.
But you have to notice that that wagon, which I just noticed today, has shafts on it, which were part of a rig that my father put together because we had a pet goat. And the goat would be harnessed into the wagon and would pull us. And there's a little picture of my sister and me with the goat pulling us in the wagon.
Where was the goat cabin?
Yeah, in the barn.
In the barn behind the house.
Yeah,
The barn behind the house.
They had a number of animals there, but the goats were the most fun because they would dance and they would climb up on the running board and then up on the hood of the car and then on the top of the car, and then they would go up on their hind legs and dance.
As part of the entertainment.
Very exciting, yes.
We spoke the other day about horses. Do you remember? We said, how many remembrances did you have of horses in the community at the time? And you both said the horses that were attached to the mowing machine.
Hay wagons.
And the hay wagons.
Hay wagons,
Yes.
clop, clop, clop.
Clop, 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 down the street.
Yeah, my grandfather had a horse. Alfred's too young to remember. But our grandfather had a big old brown horse, and they would plow the vegetable gardens and things.
And probably take care of the snow in the wintertime.
Probably.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was interesting to know that there would be the animals still on the farm, in town.
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, yes. Well, my grandfather had died in 1925, and he had a cow up until then, right?
Now, was the cow over on Van Duzer, because there was a piece of property
The cow
that
was...
belonged to the Beatties, right
That's
there
right.
where Bill's
That's
house is
That's
now.
where the cow was
That
kept.
was kept on that corner, yeah. I remember someone saying that.
And then it was the Victory Garden during the war.
That's right.
Cow was gone. In fact, my father used to tell the story of Mr. Braxton, who took care of the cow. Mr. Braxton also drove my grandfather around when he was going to Goshen. He would take him to the train in Chester, and Mr. Braxton also took care of the cow. He came in one day and said, "Judge Beatty, I'm sorry to tell you the cow's sick." "Well, what happened?" said Judge. He said, "Well, she died last night."
No longer sick.
He didn't want to give the bad news first.
I was told, and I'm sure Professor Hull is sitting here, can back me on the actual date, the main street in Warwick wasn't paved. It remained in kind of a pounded black dirt until the 30s, wasn't it? At least from Sanford's on down?
Yeah, this Route 94 was paved, was a WPA New Deal project. And big chunks were actually paved in concrete. As I recall, maybe some of you real old timers might remember that I think the so-called Seward Highway, which was that section coming out of Warwick Village and over to Florida Village, called the Seward Highway, was a concrete highway. Was it not, as I recall?
That was before my time.
Yeah,
John maybe remember.
remember that's a concrete road.
Well, living in those houses,
I can remember all the roads.
now living in those
Most
houses,
of the roads though around Warwick actually were not paved until the 1950s.
1950s.
Until 53, 54. And before that time, 90% of the roads in Warwick town were not paved.
well, there are so many families and so many areas to cover, which hopefully next year we'll do a whole series of this one family at a time. But tonight we were concentrating on the little group, the Beatty house, the Lewis house, where the Straightons lived, in the Manse, where the Bradners lived. So that's all kind of up and down Maple Avenue in that little section. And at that time, who remembers what about those houses? How often did you go in and out of those houses? I just mentioned.
Constantly. I could stand on the front porch and say, "There's Aunt Van, Aunt Marion, Aunt Meredith, Aunt Mildred, Aunt Honey, and anybody." And when I first moved to Cambridge, I was very sad because I didn't know my neighbors for a
Well,
long
now, you went from Honey's house, which was the Straightons, and you went to Auntie Blee's, but you didn't say anything about the Fowlers. Were they closed down at that time?
No, they were there, but I didn't call them Aunt Knuckle.
The Straightons told me stories about sitting at their back porch, not the front porch, because they had the second floor back porch. And they said that on a summer evening out there, because at that time, whoever was ever in the Fowler house were rather elderly people and rather hard of hearing, and they would be kind of like yelling at each other. And so the Straightons would be sitting on their back porch. They could hear the whole conversation. But then, this is the group of houses, so that you both were in and out. Do you remember all those
All
houses?
connected with front lawn.
All connected with porches and front lawns.
No walls.
No wall.
We still don't have
You
walls.
had the wall. You had the stone wall.
Well,
The Lewises had the wall.
yeah,
And you
2
had
feet
part of
high
it.
though.
Doesn't some of the wall come onto your property too?
Now it does.
Yeah, no, it does. It didn't then.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful little group of wonderful houses. Most of them built in the late part of the 19th century.
Yeah.
And all with their front porches. And again, as I first started to say, this wonderful look of people going out there in the evening. And I'm sure every one of you did that. There were times when you were all gathered out on your porches. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes, we spent a lot of time on our porches, we did.
Well, but we would go call on Mrs. Rutherford, Mrs. Rutherford, but that's a different street.
That's another
Not
street
Mrs.
behind it.
Fowler. And we'd go call when we arrived from New York in the early summer, and when we left, we'd say goodbye. Meantime, we didn't see her, but she was always in black, sitting there, and she had these 9 children, and we called them Taunt Isabel, Taunt Ruth, Taunt whatever. And Joan will remember.
Taunt Ellie.
Taunt Ellie.
Well, Isabel and Ruth were the last 2 that were in Warwick.
Yeah.
Because Isabel was in the 1810 house.
Well, those were Palmers.
Those were-
That
They
was
were the
the
daughters.
They were the daughters of the
daughters
daughters.
of one of
The
the
daughters.
9
Yeah.
children.
And they all lived in that wonderful house
Well,
that's
no, they'd
behind the
come in the
Fowlers.
summer and they would visit. And I remember, this was a story I was going to tell you, said tell a story. We would be there, and I heard that the family would all gather on the front porch. And they would look over the railing, and Taunt Isabel said, she'd say, "Oh, good news, here comes Ludlow. Bad news, here comes Scott." Well, that was Scott Fitzgerald. He was the best friend and roommate of Ludlow Fowler.
Well, you've got to tell everybody he had a little bit of a drinking problem. A little bit of a drinking problem.
Oh,
was
just
there.
martinis all day long.
That's all they want, just to keep him going. Wasn't there a wonderful story about putting him on a train? And the train, of course, the compartments on the train had the little steps that would go up, and then the platform, and the little steps that would go down. So everybody was rather grateful of seeing him go. Well, you probably, tell the story.
No, go on.
So they got him down to the station, and a little bit worse for the weather. And they got him up on the 3 steps, and they got him on the platform, and they said, "Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye." And they all went home, and he went down the other 3 steps and came back to the town. Am I right?
Called them up and said, "I just arrived."
Just arrived. Well, it must have been a very interesting life. How
That was way before our time.
Yes, it was. That was in the 20s.
Point that out.
That was in the 20s. How far back do you remember? What kind of summer was it what is your first summer recollection?
Oh, mercy, that's hard to do, but,
Wonderful.
well, the Hopi family had a little pool that was about as big as this table. And as children, well, first of all, I have to just say that my parents were older than Hopi's parents, but our mothers each had a son who didn't live. Then we each had a daughter. They each had a daughter, Mary Hope, and my mother, my sister, Mary Lou, and then several years later came Joan, and then came Jean, and then came Lilybeth. So it's been a long relationship. It's pretty amazing, and so we've always done things together. And one of the first things was to go into this little pool, which is really about the size of this table, had a little fountain, and all sit around. We were probably 2 years old, if not younger, kicking our feet and giggling and just having a wonderful time together. Lots of photographs of them kicking around the pool. So,
All right, now get a little bit older and tell us about the circuses in the barn.
oh, that was a little older. That was called the Lou Bate Brad Circus, and it was the Lewises and the Beatties and the Bradners who lived across the street. And we were probably, it was about 1939 probably. The barn, which is behind our house and was part of the barn and house that my grandfather built in 1890, and housed his horses, I guess, he had more than one, and the cow. And it still, when we were little, still had the hay that was left over in the hay mow, left over from the horses that he died in 1925. This is in the 30s. The hay was still there. So the Lou Bate Brad Circus would gather this group of children. We had a large fish tank that my father set up, filled with water, and in it was a collection of invisible fish from South America that caused great interest. I mean, everybody, I think I see it. There it is. I do think there they are. No, they were. And then we had Hopi's dog, who was a chow, who was tied up. He was the lion. And I think there was a little dueling, wasn't there? Do you remember that? But the most important thing was that there was a beam that went across the haymow, went across the hay. We could climb up that and stand on it and recite our Bible verses from Sunday school and then jump into the hay. And then everybody would clap. That was very special.
The audience was all related, needless to say.
Oh, yes, the audience was very much all related.
How about birthday parties? Were there garden birthday parties?
One of yours was on your front
Our
wall.
nurse, we had a nurse, and she planned that we should be at the fair. You were the fairies. My sister was a fairy sitting on a little stool.
We had a Fräulein. She was very good at planning events.
The birthday parties, we all dressed up.
But they were all kind of German events.
But Joan remembers, she was telling me about the Fowlers, back to the Fowlers when we went up there, about this uniform. Tell that.
Well, no, I was just thinking about the Fowlers, that they had a tremendous amount of people helping them. And they all wore those uniforms that you see up there. The help were real help, and they were, if you had a meal there, they would serve you the help. And they were, there were no kind of vacations like having a day when nothing was served or anything like that. They had all the meals, and they were served by these people who were...
In the breakfast room, you remember, there was a breakfast room in the house.
For breakfast?
Yes, you
The
go there
breakfast
first.
room was different from the dining room. The breakfast room was when you went and had informal breakfast. But that was unusual. They had a whole room for that, but the dining room was formal.
For those of you people who don't know who these followers were, Dick, that's your bailiwick, so you can say a little bit about his background. He was railroad, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was an attorney and practiced originally in New York, and he was very much involved in the Lehigh and Hudson River Railway here, as well as the West Shore Railroad that ran up to Newburgh on the west shore of the Hudson. And he married what is the name again? The family, not
Across the street.
Dunnings.
Dunnings.
The Dunning family, and the Dunnings had been very interested in flowers. They had one of the first greenhouses, private family greenhouses in Orange County, going back to the Civil War, right after the Civil War, and so she became quite interested in this, and she married Fowler, and then they started formal gardens on property that they acquired just across the street from her family's.
Which is the property now going down to the pond. How about the department store in town? Do you remember?
Todd.
Todd.
Todd's department.
Oh, she was wonderful.
Tell a story about
John,
it.
you tell about Todd. Did you do anything?
Todd what?
Tell us.
But when you're talking about Aikens, I was remembering about Doogie.
Doogie.
Oh, Mr. Doogie, yeah.
You worked there, John, didn't you, Dewey?
They had Schratt's
Mr.
Spin
Doogie.
and real ice cream. Dolly Madison ice cream.
Oh, yeah.
And it was
And where was Judy?
right where Forever Jewelers.
Oh.
And Mr. Doogie lived upstairs. Had two or three dogs.
No, where the Noble Pies was.
Yeah.
The first Forever Jeweler, they've now moved into the next door.
Yeah.
It was the one on the
With
ground
the two
floor.
little steps down.
No,
The
it
ground
was
floor.
ground floor. It was the one that goes up.
But who had the one across the street for ice cream sodas?
That
Mr.
came
Brightman.
with soft ice cream made in it.
Oh, Mr. Doogie was the first?
With the real ice cream. at the drugstore because incorporated ice cream for the people who came to put in their prescriptions and had to wait, then they would sell them ice cream. And that was the whole, generation of ice cream.
I think that started with the Bradners, that when old Dr. Bradner, Henry Bradner, that was his idea, that these people are sitting around waiting, let's sell them something. So there's a wonderful description of how he made fizzy water. And it was just unbelievable, because he dragged these buckets of water up and down the cellar steps and put it in some sort of a pressurized thing, and it was really amazing how hard it was to make this fizzy water, but it kept the customers sitting there while they were waiting for their...
And then you had the Oakland Diner up the street, the old diner next to the Oakland Theater,
Oh, yes,
the movie theater.
that was it.
Let's go on to the war. Who remembers being children during the war? Do you remember any of the things that happened? Do you
It
remember?
was awful, I didn't pay attention.
Didn't pay any
I
attention
don't
to it?
think so.
Nobody paid any
Isn't that
attention.
terrible?
Weren't there still, didn't?
Oh, we had coupons to buy.
Coupons, because I have a note of having food rations
Right.
and gas rations.
Oh, yeah, then we had
Food
Victory
ration-
Garden.
And Victory Garden, you had a Victory Garden in the garden, didn't you?
Yeah.
There at the house. And who remembers the military being around? Was there a lot of soldiers around, people coming back? Do you remember people coming back from the war?
No, I don't. I remember the Depression.
John, you do.
And my
You
father
remember
had
more, will you talk up?
John came back.
John
He's
was in World War II.
I remember one volunteer who always rode in the parade in the first car. A real character, this guy.
Your father.
Every single parade. Do you remember him?
I should.
I think his name was Madison. He had a World War I uniform.
Madison.
Oh, he marched. He marched.
He never.
Well, he rode when I was young. You have to
He
remember.
said, Daddy, you go to
He
war?
marched and
Oh,
led
I'm
the
marching.
parade. He marched the parade. But you're right, and you're right.
Please,
See,
no
it's
riding in
horrible.
these cars. People do now.
Do people remember house parties after the war? When you were teenagers after the war? You remember cocktail parties? Do you remember what
Yeah.
people used to serve? Remember martinis, Manhattans, highballs?
Oh, yes, all those things.
Remember them coming out in trays instead of bar?
Yes,
So it was a
right.
completely different way of doing
You
things.
gotta talk up, people like
Opie?
to talk up, what do you remember?
Opie, do you remember parties at the house with cocktails?
Oh, no, we never drank a drop.
We had a beautiful rehearsal dinner, 1950 at the Fowler Porch for about 150 people. That was fabulous.
On the porch,
On the porch.
at the Fowlers?
Yes, just, oh, elegant. But you know what I thought was so interesting? I remembered this servant house was the first hospital. And there it is, the office building, you know that building?
Yeah, the Kennedy Building, right around the corner of that.
Forrester House.
Yeah.
And there was much talk about having the first hospitals. And then Dr. Buck Brander went off to war. There was going to be a hospital in the Sanford Field at one point. Did you know that? And they gave that up after the war. And then they saved this servant house, you know, on Forrester Avenue. And that became the first hospital.
In
And-
1960s.
Yeah. And they asked the sisters to be the nuns for the nurses, wasn't that
They were
right?
German order, weren't they? I think they were German.
Franciscan Sisters of Florida.
Were they?
That's
Is that what they are?
in 39, yeah.
So that brings us to the war, and after the war. Who remembers the boys coming back? Do you remember people coming back from the war? Second World War?
Yeah, we went dancing.
Tell us about it. Tell us about it. Where were the dances?
Well, we were in New York. I was a debutante.
Ah, and did you debutante out here at all? Did you give parties
That
out in
was
the country?
46, actually.
Did you give parties out here or go to parties
No,
out?
but we went to Long Island. Long
but
Island
that's
had
different.
wonderful parties. I don't think we had any here. Did we have a coming out party?
I did.
It wasn't here.
What they did was they resurrected, and in my era, it was the tuxedo autumn ball.
Oh, the tuxedo,
And the
right?
tuxedo autumn ball, and we would get escorted to various functions over in Tuxedo by the Fowler members of the Fowler family. And sometimes we get home all right, and sometimes we just have to stay. But the autumn ball was one of the customs of the Tuxedo Club, which was really quite remarkable. And but that debutante sort of situation has, I think, gone into the history book, but I'll have to call over there and find out.
Let's talk about gardens. Who remembers nice gardens? Who had good gardens?
Well, Mrs. Ely down there.
That is in the new magazine, the Living Magazine.
Living Magazine,
This
please
month,
look.
it's
Everybody,
featured.
the Martha Stewart,
Martha Stewart's
this
magazine.
issue of, it's called Meadowburn,
Yeah.
down the Gerards had this beautiful garden under the name of, well, Ely.
Yeah, which Mrs. Ely is as the founder of the garden, but it's the Coster Gerard family that's putting it back. Actually, what was it, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it was practically a ruin. And they, in the last number of years,
Fabulous
fabulous.
flowers,
I mean, dahlias, bushes of dahlias bigger than this table.
Michael, Mrs. Ely became the first, she was a prominent woman as a botanist back in the days before women were, and she founded and became the first president of the Garden Club of America.
There you go, there you go. How about gardens here? Who remembers gardens here?
Well, we had one.
You had a very nice garden.
My mother had
You had a nice garden. Yeah. So that's 2 gardens.
Yeah, my grandmother did.
Oh, well, then it's
Mrs.
a
Bradford.
flower garden. Here, we
And then the most famous one on that block was the Fowler Garden.
Yeah, we
With
should
the,
show that.
with the
And
formal beds.
don't forget Aunt Dorothy's garden up there at the farm.
Up at the farm.
Absolutely.
And Mrs. Bradner's garden behind her house.
Precisely, my dear
Yeah.
Watson.
Now, Michael, wasn't there, as I recall, there was an Orange County club that every year had a big dinner at the Waldorf Astoria in New York?
There are photographs of
And
them.
people from all over Orange County, many of whom worked in New York and often would spend the week in New York, come out on the weekends. Well, each year they'd have this big dinner party in the city.
I've seen it, this
And it was a wonderful way of people all over Orange County networking. That's how, in the old days, people from Warwick were friendly with people from Newburgh.
Or Middletown that had some great gardens.
Middletown.
Yeah.
I mean, there was this huge network of families and friends.
And all connected with Tuxedo Park, which was very important at the time, in part of the gardens, they were in Tuxedo Park.
Michael, one of the most famous gardens was, we've been interested in this for years, is Japanese gardens.
That's in
And
Middletown.
in Middletown, that was the Clemson Park
Clemson
Garden,
Park.
which was absolutely outstanding. And what the Dunning family did to preserve the artifacts, because it fell into questionable hands, shall I say. And they were destroying the artifacts. They had a fantastic auction, and we were the recipients of several of the lanterns, of which one lives in Winters. And we have one, and they are absolutely outstanding, and I think
You had a
the Moon
crane.
Bridge is still.
Don't you have a crane?
Yes,
also? A lead crane.
the cranes went to Winters.
Oh.
And so, but that was the.
That was a fabulous
That was
garden.
one of the first Oriental gardens in the United States, I believe, and I think it even had a Shinto shrine.
Yeah.
Well, I think they were collected from Japan.
They're collected
Oh, they're
from
old
Japan.
Japan.
Yeah. And this was the old way of, this was just something that was a real treasure up there in Middletown, and I think parts of it still are, maybe. I can't guarantee it.
I can't guarantee that either. The few houses that I've had involvement with up
Part of
there
my
years ago,
sketchy history.
they're pretty much gone. After the auction, there wasn't much left to gardens up there.
Yeah.
Well, that takes us to 8 o'clock, and I would like to open this to any questions other than what we've already had in the room.
What happened to the Fowler family?
They died.
No.
They all died.
I mean, the whole family died?
No.
They
Just about.
just,
Well, because upstate was where I lived before, I had a farm, and there was a family by the name of Fowler up there that were wealthy. So I wonder if that was an extension.
I don't know.
Where was that?
It's a little town southwest of Cooperstown.
I don't know if anybody.
And had a town called St. John's there.
Oh,
No, that I would know. I know that.
Michael?
What? Yes.
Michael, that
Maybe it's one of their
it is,
children.
Potsy and Morgan Palmer are still very much with us, and that part, there's a small segment right there that could help us out with this, if needed.
If needed. But the last of the Fowlers were living in the house before your mother and father bought that property. Would you say that's 1948, 49?
52.
52.
52 is when they raised the house.
Raised the house.
Oh, dear, no.
And it was just too expensive to keep it going.
To keep it going.
And so many of the older fellows had died as well. So, well, actually, they bought the Kennedy house, the red brick
The
house
back.
on Colonial Avenue, which had actually been part of Fowler property originally.
well, then they made the development and the zoning was, houses are pretty close together. That was the zoning then. But then they gave half of it to the garden club.
The back half where the garden was.
Yeah, to save the garden and the open space back there.
And now there's been
There's
some
8 acres
remarkable,
still there.
yeah, and remarkable things have been done. Those of you that have not seen the garden should take a walk through that.
Of
The woodlands.
The woodlands.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Michael, I think maybe you should explain how to get there.
To
the
woodlands.
Well, you go down up Maple Avenue, right to Robin Gray.
Right.
And
Yes.
follow the curving road all the way down and
Some
you see a
people have
sign.
never been there.
Yeah, there's a sign. It's off of 94.
Yes, it's a very nice walk down.
It's a very
Down
nice
instead of-
I know, it's good.
You've been down?
Yes.
Wonderful, what's happening?
That's where we are.
I thought that before we close, Jean, could you talk a bit about what your presentation is going to be
At the
library on, that's the 11th of September?
11th of September at 6:30. I'm going to talk about the Fowler family and just tell you more about the background of that family. That's very interesting, going back to the time when Thomas and Mary Powell, for whom we haven't really mentioned the fact that the man that built the house here was Thomas Powell Fowler, named after Thomas Powell, who, with his wife Mary Powell, had a steamship company in the 1850s that went right up until the early 1900s. The fastest ship on the Hudson was the Mary Powell, and the Thomas Powell came pretty close. And so I'm going to talk about the whole family, going back to that in a
Thank you.
Is there any other?
I
Yes.
have one quick little anecdote, and that is that there was this wonderful sister, of course I love them all, but there was this wonderful sister called Miss Ruth Fowler. And Miss Ruth Fowler was known for one major distinction, and I grew up with this. And Uncle Ludlow, who was her brother, would say, well, we would discuss about what Ruth could do. And so it was Miss Ruth Fowler could drive a car because she could play the Victrola. That was a wonderful place.
So you see, The area is full of wonderful and charming stories, all brought about by our little presentation back here on the front porch. Actually, 2 of these dresses belong to Jean.
I
You
was
were
going to
what?
ask if that wasn't so, that little silk dress you
Yes.
said
There
was
are 2 of those
made by
dresses
your
are
mom.
yours. Huh?
Yes, that was one my mother made. My mother was a wonderful seamstress, and she made that for Liberty silk print. And this little one, I have a picture that came with this little blue and white one. And the other one is this 2-piece dress that was my mother's. So we're well represented.
Well
Very
represented.
nice. Yeah.
Michael, what's the military uniform?
What is the military uniform? Just a representation of the wartime. No one in particular. It's just simply to show that what would have happened in the 1940s if somebody were invited for highballs and martinis on the porch, somewhere between 41 and 46. And the gentleman, just an example of the white flannels and the blue coat that was almost a uniform for men at the time, still is. Not the flannel trousers, but certainly the blazer jacket is something that is still worn for everything and anything. I think it's the one piece of male attire that you can go anywhere in the world and be dressed up with a blue blazer. It serves every purpose.
And that was worn at the
Yes,
head.
all the time. Yes.
One phenomenon too about porches is that the porch was where community raconteurs would spend long periods on the porch talking about the past. And we had in Warwick, when I was growing up, some amazing raconteurs. Jean's father was one of them, George Hansen, there were a number of them, and they delighted in telling stories. And Jack Beatty, they just delighted in, and they were performers too. I mean, they were very expressive. Their voice would go up and down, and their hands would go this way and that way, and this was quite common. And this storytelling phenomenon was often played out, enacted on the porches of Warwick's homes. And this is something that I miss as an historian now of Warwick. We don't have them anymore. You know, they've almost all died, and unfortunately, we didn't have much of an opportunity to tape record them. And as a result, we've lost a tremendous amount of history, oral history.
We can also not allow for the fact that many of the Warwick Historical Society meetings were held on Lee's front porch and in the back parlor.
Yeah.
Joe, you know that. You know how many of those things that everybody attended and how much got served at those things. And there, again, were the days of the eyeballs. And there were quite a few eyeballs. But it was, the front porch had a great deal to do with living in a community like this in the summer months. And with all that, I thank you for being here tonight. And wonderful things to tell you. So please attend some of our meetings next year. Thank you.
Thank you.